Well, good evening.
Good evening.
This is class number 2 in our 4-week block on discovering, maybe rediscovering the Old Testament. If you recall, last week I spent the time both explaining kind of the nature of the Old Testament and trying to build a case for why we should bother. We should bother for all sorts of reasons, but not the least of which is the simple scope of the Old Testament. It's nearly 75% of the Bible. When Jesus himself refers to the Scriptures, he means the Old Testament. The Old Testament is where we discover the character and the nature of God himself. God's revelation is full and complete within the person of Christ, but it begins in the Old Testament. The New Testament, as important as it is, really only makes enough sense, the sort of sense it should make, when we understand where it comes from and what it is referring to. The Old Testament is that foundational story. It is that foundational information. It is that foundational history of God and his creation, God and his people, and we people with each other. We learn who God is, and we learn who we are within the scope of the Old Testament. I had mentioned just before the class started that the handout for last week where it had the Greek ordering from the Septuagint versus the Hebrew Masoretic ordering of the books of the Old Testament. They group them slightly differently, but tonight it doesn't matter, because tonight both orderings agree that the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, stand alone. Nothing else is like them. Do they tell history? Yes. Is there prophecy? Sure. Is there wisdom? Lots of it. Is there poetry? Some of that too. However, these first 5 books are different than all of the others. If the Old Testament is the foundation, then this is the foundation of the foundation. This is the cornerstone of the foundation. This is where everything begins. The 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, as they are often referred to. Tradition is universal that Moses is the primary author of these first 5 books. And they are grouped together partly because of his authorship, and they are grouped together because of what they convey. This is the fundamental story of who Israel is and why any of this makes any difference at all. These first 5 books, the Pentateuch or the 5 books of Moses, are often referred to quite simply by yet another name, and that is Torah. Torah, which roughly translates to law. Torah, God's law. Now, Torah may refer to more specifically as the Torah of the 10 Commandments, where God gives his 10 eternal and everlasting principles to his people about what their relationship with God should be and their relationship with each other, how it should be ordered in morals, in respect, in care, and in proper relation to the worship of God. But the 10 Commandments themselves do not occur within a vacuum. They occur within this overarching fundamental story found within the first 5 books of the Bible. They are all collectively referred to as Torah. They are all collectively understood as a telling of God's law. God's law is primary and principal gift to Israel. God's law, the primary and principal gift of God of the Old Testament. Now, why is law such a gift? Whether you are thinking of something in the epistles, like we just had in our evening prayer service, where Paul is writing to the Galatians saying, basically, don't tie yourselves to the law unless you're prepared to follow the whole thing, which frankly you'll never manage to do, to those of us in contemporary America who tend to see the law as basically kind of a buzzkill. That, the law. It's the man trying to put me down, or it's the laws making me do something, or the law says I have to do that, or maybe like our learned colleague over there, law is a field of arcane knowledge that is an opportunity to demonstrate your erudition.
Very useful.
Yes. So law doesn't necessarily bring these instant connotations of something good and positive. But to the Old Testament, to Israel, and from God's perspective, the law, the giving of the law, is a great, it is a monumental, it is a miraculous gift. There's nothing else quite like it. Let me put it in these terms to try to help understand why the law is such a good thing, why it's such a needful thing, and why even in the arcane portions of the ceremonial law of Leviticus, or some of the particulars of the civil law found within Deuteronomy, that there is something that is great and glorious in the law, something filling Israel with gratitude when they remember. I want to put it in these terms. Teenagers. We are all teenagers to God. Okay? Those of you who have had teenagers, perhaps you remember. Those of you who have been teenagers, you have probably wiped it out of your memory. Teenagers know it all. Teenagers do it all. Teenagers are insufferable and annoying and irritating and just big enough to get themselves in every conceivable trouble, but still immature enough to avoid that trouble or to extricate themselves from it before it gets really, really bad. Teenagers, though they will say, Mom, or Dad, really do respond in a positive manner, even if it's completely internal and they would never cop to it, but do respond positively to some boundaries. Now, you find some teenagers who their parents just say, you know what, whatever. Do whatever you want. And there's a period of woohoo that they're just going to go nuts and they're going to have a great, great time. And that'll last for a little while. And those are some of the saddest and most self-destructive teenagers you'll find. There's an emptiness inside that says, my parents didn't care enough to tell me no. They didn't have any boundaries. Why didn't they tell me it would get this bad? You leave a teenager to their own devices and say, hey, baby, whatever. Not only are they going to get themselves in the trouble they can't get themselves out of, but you are communicating something fundamental to them, that I don't care enough about you to look mean, or to seem difficult, or to not be your buddy, but to give you boundaries that will help you, that will save you, and that frankly reflect my love for you. The teenagers who have had those boundaries, even when they bump up against them at some fundamental level, even if it takes them 10 or 20 years before they acknowledge it, they are grateful and they are thankful. Yeah, it was kind of a bummer that, Mom gave me a curfew and all that, but at the end of the day, I knew she loved me. It was for my own good. That's the law. That's the law. Okay? Whether it seems very petty and particular and arcane, whether it seems to make very little sense to us whatsoever, the law is a gift because it demonstrates God's love for Israel. It says, I don't care what the other children do. If you're in my family, we do this. It was a way for Israel to be identified as not like everybody else. Well, Johnny's parents let them stay up till 11 o'clock. You're not in Johnny's house. This is my house. As long as you live under my roof, this is bedtime. And, Johnny who's falling asleep in class every day, and you who are awake and alert, the teacher can pick out. Oh yeah, I know his folks. They're going to make sure he goes to bed. There's a testimony. I know they're going to make sure that he eats a good breakfast. Or I know he's the one who's going to bring a pencil and not have to borrow it you can tell. Your family shapes you. And sometimes those boundaries in that law, it distinguishes you from everything else and everyone else going around and going along. Some of the law is intended for our protection. Okay? Why couldn't the Israelites eat pork? I love bacon. One of the most perfect foods invented. Well, what if we put it in the context of scavenging trash-eating animal in a time before refrigeration? They might not have known what trichinosis was, but they didn't suffer from it because they avoided pork in general. Is that why God said don't eat? I don't know. I don't know if that's why the rules of kashrut, of the kosher foods, were in place or not. But some of them make legitimate health sense. And a lot of times, we've had to wait centuries after the fact before we could look back and scientifically realize that makes perfect sense. It seemed rather arbitrary, but now that we know how the world works in a different manner, we would have invented that ourselves had we known. Thank you, God. Some of the rules, even if we can't find a one-to-one correlation to some issue of health or what have you, once again serve to distinguish Israel from everyone else. I don't care what the other nations do. If you are my people, we do things like this. You will reflect me, my nature, my character. Well, I'm going to stick out. Of course you're going to stick out. I'm not going to be locked on. Of course you're not going to be out. You're my kid. You're not theirs, you're mine. And that should mean something. These other nations should be able to look at you and think you're kind of weird and freaky. And that's okay. Because they're going to know you have been set apart. You have been chosen. You have been chosen by me. The law for protection, but also for identity as a mark of the family of God is a great and gracious gift, even when it doesn't seem like it, look like it, or feel like it. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about these first 5 books of Moses. The Old Testament is the best part of the Bible, in my estimation, for teaching children, because it's stories, and the stories are awesome. Like, if there is a story that's like a big budget summer blockbuster, it's in the Old Testament. I mean, imagine somebody filming Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and there's a fiery furnace, and they're in there, and they're not burned, and there's a 4th figure in there. I mean, this would be like a special effects extravaganza. You know, if there is some sort of amazing human drama, it's there typically in the Old Testament. Judah and Tamar. Judah, who refuses to take care of his own daughter-in-law, who has to be tricked into doing what he ought. If there is a story that lends itself to light the imagination, the sense of adventure or wonder, it's probably in the Old Testament. There's action, there's drama, there's intrigue, there's courage, there's boldness. And the stories stand out because they are so awesome. What I would like to do is to give you some of the story within these 5 books. Not to be fully comprehensive, because we can't be, but to help set the stage for you and remind you of how the players fit together and how the narrative flows, so that when you are in your own personal private Bible study, you've been given a heads up about what it is you are about to read. After the class and the camera was off, a few of us got into a conversation about what telling the stories ahead of time can do in your own Bible study. And I likened it to watching opera or the ballet. Something where there's a storyline, but it can be kind of difficult to pull out from just watching the action. Like in ballet, the dance is really stylized, and they don't say anything. Or in opera, where the libretto might be in a completely different language. But even if you understand it, because it's being sung in an operatic style, you're not picking it up like dialogue. So, by having the story in subtitles, or by giving you the story ahead of time to read through the program, you have an idea about what they're going to do. And then, now that you know, now that you got the big picture in your head, you can watch the act. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's what that means. Yeah, that dance. Now they're at this part. I'm giving you some clues ahead of time, so in your own reading, stuff will start to come together. Anyone ever watch TV with the closed captions on? Somehow you hear better. It's just the way our brains work. That the people, it's like they're speaking louder, but they're not. But our brain is picking up the words, and our ears are picking up the sound, and it's being linked. And suddenly it sounds clearer than it did before, but the sound hasn't changed at all. That's what I'm hoping to do. I'm going to tell you some stories, and they're going to be big, broad strokes, but I'm hopeful that at the end of it, as you do your own reading, it'll be the closed captions that allow the text to speak just a little more clearly than it might have before. Hang on, we're going to move fast. We are going to start off in Genesis, the very beginning. For those of you who are here for the introduction to the Bible, we spent some time in Genesis because of the importance of how it begins. In the beginning, God. The end. I mean, that's what it's really all about. The Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, not random chance, not primordial soup, not whatever it is. In the beginning, God. Everything else is subsequent to that. Everything else is a consequence of God, pre-existent, eternal, all-knowing, almighty, and creation flows through Him. In Genesis, we get that cornerstone of the foundation laid, where the story of Israel is now explained and extrapolated through a retelling of the history of Israel. Take it in the context, please, that Moses is writing these books. Moses, who is a contemporary of the next 4 books. Okay, Moses is like the main character, basically, of Exodus, right? Genesis, written by Moses, is basically answering the question, how in the world did we get in this jam? We're Israel, we're supposed to be God's chosen people, we're in slavery, or we're out of slavery, now we're wandering around. What in the world? How did we get here? And Genesis answers that question. Genesis, when you see it as a retrospective, it is not intended to be comprehensive about the universal human experience in all times and in all places. It's about Israel. Now sometimes, in explaining the history of Israel, it will be about universal events. To speak of the creation, to speak of Adam and Eve, is a universal human event. Israel's a part of it. So you get these big macrocosmic things that have to do with everyone. Tower of Babel, Noah and the flood. These are all things that Israel's a part of, but then again, so is everyone else. But then it will become very, very specific in certain spots. It'll be a tiny little family in the middle of nowhere. It's not talking about all people in all places and at all times. But suddenly we're concentrating on Isaac and Rebekah and a love story where God brings a family together and in His faithfulness finds a wife in just the right time, in just the right spot, and in just the right way. Or Jacob and Rachel, where a love story has to stand the test of not just 7 years of service to earn her hand, but 14 when the father-in-law turns out to be a lot sneakier than anybody imagined. Not a universal experience in the sense of it's intended to speak comprehensively about all of human history, but taking the story of Israel and explaining from the beginning, this is how God has chosen you, his people. This is how he has dealt both with the world and you in it. But this is how we have found ourselves where we are now. In the beginning, God creates everything that there is. Are these 6 days yod? Are they 24-hour periods? Well, there's no sun, so the specificity of that is unknowable. Are they periods of time? Possibly. There is a poetry inherent in the first part of Genesis that is difficult to define in precise terms. It's a little bit like some of these genealogies, where they talk about so-and-so is the father of so-and-so. Does that mean his biological father one generation? Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe, sort of like how Genesis skips periods of time, some of the genealogies themselves are done in broad strokes. You're hitting the important, memorable people and sometimes leaving out whole generations. To say that Barack Obama is the President of the United States, he sits and serves in the Oval Office like presidents before him. Like both George Bushes, like Theodore Roosevelt, like Thomas Jefferson, and like George Washington. It's true, and there is an element of even a chronological order to that, but it is not with detail comprehensiveness. You follow? That sometimes the genealogies, like some of the poetry in the beginning of Genesis, we can't necessarily define with any sense of precision what this exactly means. So, what is the time period of Genesis 1? Or Genesis 1 and 2, we don't really know. However, what we do know is that in the beginning it was God. God creates all that there is. And we know that God creates in order. And that God creates in power. And that God creates through his hands and in his love. And it is through God and God alone that there is all that there is, seen and unseen. We get the story of Adam and Eve, God fashioning Adam in his own hands in the dust of the earth and breathing the spirit of life into him. The story of how Eve is granted to Adam because of all the things that God has made and he's proclaimed good. The first thing that he says is not good is what? That Adam is alone. It's not good. And hence Eve. We see their fall. That God has placed a single tree within the garden as off limits. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And a serpent, the most cunning and wily of all animals, has convinced Eve first to give it a try. She does. Adam jumps on board, and they know exactly what they have done. God comes calling, and they hide. They're filled now, for the first time, with shame. And there are consequences to their disobedience. A consequence that will be not just for them, but for all generations. A consequence of pain and of toil, of suffering, of mortality, therefore of death. And this comes as a consequence of disobedience. Isn't that human nature, though? The one that don't do this one, don't, whatever you do.
Push the red button with his hand.
You know? And even the interaction there. You know? God asked Adam, she did it. God asked Eve, serpent did it. You know, the passing the buck, even from the beginning. Not being able to take responsibility for our own disobedient actions. But even in this ruination of Eden and the casting out into a harsh world where nature is no longer a companion and friend, but now is an adversary to be fought and tamed, that even in that, God offers his first promise that there will come a time where the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. Though his heel will be bitten, he will crush the head and kill the serpent. It is a messianic prophecy that happens all the way back in the beginning of Genesis. That God has a plan to redeem what we have spoiled. And it begins at the very beginning. We see from Genesis, of course, also Cain and Abel, the first sibling rivalry, and out of jealousy and out of anger, the terrible things and the terrible consequences that can happen. Why is Cain so mad? He's jealous. He's jealous. They both offer sacrifices, and God favors Abel's and not Cain's. Why? Is it because Cain kind of withholds, or Cain is kind of grudging, or Abel's is the first fruit? We're not really sure. Maybe it's one of those things, maybe it's all those things, but what we do know is Cain's response. For whatever reason, God favors Abel's sacrifices over Cain's, and Cain just can't stand it. And it is both a moment in history and a foundational part of who Israel is, but it's a foundational part of who we are. This is what happens when we have this anger. This is what happens when we let the bitterness take control, and the rage and the ugliness. The death comes. The consequences can be dire. After Cain himself is cast out, subsequent generations are born. The population begins to spread. There was a question last week about how the whole world can come from two people, and I offered the reminder that even the most atheistic scientist who studies anthropology will posit that all of humanity comes from a common ancestor. These days they tend to point somewhere in Africa, and they've even kind of jokingly called Adam and Eve. That it seems that after a few centuries of casting doubt on it, even science seems to point to an initial couple. And when you run the statistics of population, man, you can grow a population like that. Anyone who's ever had rabbits, the whole joke about rabbits multiplying, it's totally serious. That rabbit's as a kid, and man, you hit a lot of rabbits really quick. People are no different. It's just spread out over a greater period of time and over a greater landmass. But you think two couples, say they have 4 children, each of those 4 children have in turn 4 children, each of those children in turn have 4 children. Those are not extraordinarily large families, but in the course of just a few generations, the multiplying effect is enormous. Within just a few generations, you can see how the population could explode. Again, we are told high points here. We're not told everything. How many children do Adam and Eve have? We have no idea. We have no idea. We are told Cain, Abel, and Seth. Okay? Are those their only children? We have no idea. They're in Eden for a long, long time. And even after that, they are alive for an indeterminate amount of time. Why in the world would they only have the 3 children? Doesn't really fit. Couldn't they have lots? Presumably they could. As humanity begins to spread, this is a story that we will see repeated again and again and again. A relationship that was initially close and intimate with God becomes strained. We wander. We're teenagers. We're dumb. And we're rebellious. The population grows. The people begin to spread. And they begin to do foolish, awful things. This is where the story of Noah and the flood comes in. Humanity had gotten so bad. We had wandered so far and become so rebellious that it seemed like the best plan was to just wipe the slate clean. Start over. God blesses Noah and his family to preserve humanity and to not wipe us out fully and completely. We know the story about building a big giant boat. Everybody laughs at him. Is that right? He gathered the animals in the 2x2 and all that kind of stuff in 40 days in the rain and repopulation of the world coming through Noah. How many generations between Noah and Adam? We have no idea. There is a genealogy there, but again, Is that intended to convey absolutely every person in chronological order? Or are we skipping and hitting high points? We don't know. But again, the same old story. We have now repopulated after Noah. And what do? We're dumb. We're rebellious. We're teenagers. And we start doing the wrong thing over again. Humanity has grown again and it's spread out, and the wickedness begins to grow. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. Anyone remember how that gets started? We are so numerous, and we have become so wise and so educated that we together may pool our common resources and our common knowledge, and we can build a tower so strong, so tall, and so high that it will rival the glory of God himself. A, that's stupid. B, that tells you an awful lot about how stupid we were. And it's instructive about humanity that there is this sense of, well, we'll all combine forces and we'll be so great. And they're punished, and there's a consequence to this, the Tower of Babel. But, I mean, think of it. A tower that's really, really big, and now you're better than God. I mean, who thinks of this stuff? What committee comes together and says, yes. What will defeat God and crown humanity at the apex of all creation? Yes, a tower. That will do it. And yet, not out of the achievement of their hands, but out of the desires of the hearts and the ambition of their souls, God punishes this. It's not that if somehow they had made the tower, that would then defeat God, but what kind of perverse perspective tries to do it in the first place? Tries to use the gift of a common tongue in that particular manner. And the tongues are changed. Is this a metaphor about how, as humanity spread, individual cultures popped up? I don't know. Was there a tower? I certainly believe there was a tower. But at the end of the day, this is reminding Israel how they've gotten the jam that they've gotten into. That from the beginning, what has happened time and time and time again, humanity that has had an intimate relationship with God, we rebel, we do stupid things, we challenge God directly, and we suffer consequences. Now we get now to the central figure of Genesis. If there is a central figure within the rest of the 4 books of the Pentateuch, it's Moses. If we have a central figure within Genesis itself, it's not Adam, it's not Noah, it's Abraham. Abraham. Because the covenant, the chosen nature of Israel occurs here. Abraham is the heart and the soul of the Genesis story, and it's his story that covers the bulk of the heart of Genesis as well. Genesis has 50 chapters. Well, from 12 to 25, it's the story of Abraham. Where we get a chosen people, where we get a covenant, where we get a promised land, it all begins here. Of this great mass of humanity, now speaking its various tongues and tribes and languages, God calls one man, Abram, who lives in Ur of the Chaldees. And God calls Abram, and he says, I want you to follow me. I want you to, as a mature man who's established a home and a presence and built your wealth, I want you to leave it all behind. I want you to leave everybody you know and all the stuff you're familiar with, and I want you to come follow me. And he does it. Abram actually does it. And he follows where God desires him to go. And through, again, a lot of stupid decisions and bad behavior by Abram, God eventually leads him into the promised land. And God renews his promise and renames Abram Abraham. From exalted father Abram to father of many, or a great nation, Abraham. and renews a promise that says, though you two, Abraham and Sarah, may be childless, through you I will build a mighty nation. Through your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, as numerous as the sand in the seashore. I will bless the entire world through your descendants. That's a pretty big deal. That's the beginning of the covenant with God's people. It is a covenant, a lasting, enduring, and eternal promise that God Himself will fulfill the terms of. There's this kind of weird scene that doesn't make a lot of sense to us because we didn't understand the culture, where there's the sacrificial animal split in half, and there's the flaming torch, the smudge pot that passes through. And basically, it's what we would understand as like if you ever bought a house, you go around the closing table to sign the contract. This is the contract that's being signed between God and Abraham, between God and all of Abraham's descendants of this promise. And in a contract, you have two parties, right? And the two parties come to a mutually agreeable terms where there's some sort of compensation granted back and forth that the contract sets the terms for. In the covenant that God establishes with Abraham, God fulfills both sides of the terms. Abraham has to do jack. And we see this represented in this weird sort of sequence we don't understand about the split carcass and the smudge pots. Well, that's the closing table, as I said, but both parties were supposed to walk through the sacrifice. Who's walking through the sacrifice? Not Abraham, he's asleep. This is like if you were going to buy a house from someone, and you go to the closing table, and there's no chair for you. The seller says, well, here are the keys to the house. I'll write a check to myself. I'll just sign under buyer, under seller, and I'm just going to give you the deed. God Himself, it will come through His righteousness and His faithfulness, and not Abraham's. And that is how the covenant is established. Abraham and Sarah, they do finally have that child, the child of the promise. It is in their old age. His name is Isaac. Isaac. What does Isaac mean? Laughter. Why laughter? God says this is what you will call your child. Because to both Abraham and Sarah, when they're given the news that they will finally conceive, they both laugh. Oh yeah? You're going to remember that one. You're going to remember that one. Because that's what your son's name is going to be. And every time you call him in for supper, you're going to remember just how dumb you were. The faithfulness of God is found within the birth of Isaac. The impatience of man is found within the birth of Ishmael. Because Sarah doesn't seem to conceive, even though they've been told for years and years they're going to have this baby, they try to circumvent the process. She says, hey, Abraham, why don't you impregnate my servant? She can sit on my lap as she gives birth. I will claim the child as my own, and that way we're going to make it happen. It's like in vitro fertilization BC. And what happens? There is nothing but strife and heartache because of this, and it's our own impatience. We will see this played out several times in the Old Testament. Frankly, we will see this played out in our own lives. You know that the Lord will provide, but some way, somehow, you get I just got to do it. I got to make it happen, rather than be patient. All right. Through Isaac, through Isaac and Rebekah, we are offered then two sons, Esau and Jacob. We know the story of Esau is first. Jacob is holding on to the ankle as they are born. And from the beginning, there's something up with this Jacob kid. He's a schemer, and he's a sly one. And I mean, how many kids are born hanging on to the first one? I mean, there's something up from the very beginning with this guy. And there is sibling rivalry that starts from the moment of birth and carries on for nearly the rest of their lives. Though Esau is the firstborn, and in the culture everything should pass through him, the promise does not go to Esau. It eventually rests on Jacob. And there's even a story about that. There's a little trickery on Jacob's part, and poor Esau, you just kind of have to feel bad for him because he makes some dumb decisions too, but man, I mean, one dumb decision and Jacob just has it all over him. But Jacob is able to take away Esau's birthright. He is able to even sneak his dying father's blessing. And yet, man, who leads a mighty army, in terror, the grown Jacob, who has realized the sins of his wayward youth, is fearful. Though he wishes he could give it all back and he wishes he could have it to do all over again, he knows that can never happen. And now he knows that the piper is eventually to be paid and Esau's going to come for him. And on the night before Esau comes for him, Jacob wrestles an angel. Might even be the presence of God himself. Remember the story where they're wrestling on the mountaintop? I will not let you go until you bless me. I will not let you go until you bless me. There is a blessing given. And Jacob is renamed. Jacob is renamed Israel. Israel, which means struggles with God. Struggles with God. They're in a microcosm. Through his own bad behavior, Jacob is wrestling with this angel. He's doing that because he's scared to death that all of his bad actions in his youth are going to come bite him in the butt. And they are. But he wrestles with God, refusing to let go until he is blessed. And that is Israel. That's God's chosen people, not just the man, but the nation. I will not let you go until you bless me. Jacob himself, with a hard life, and grows up a lot, especially in trying to get married and being tricked. He wants to marry the beautiful Rachel. And the father, Laban, makes him work for 7 years before he can earn the right to ask for his daughter's hand, and he finally does it, only to be given Leah, the older daughter, instead. Say, well, I mean, I can't possibly marry off the younger daughter. If the older daughter's an old maid, you got to take one. You got to take them both if you want one of them. And so Jacob actually marries Leah and works another 7 years to finally marry the woman that he truly loves. He winds up having, wives and concubines and everything else, and through this will have eventually 12 sons. These 12 sons, through whom will come the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes will correspond to the descendants of each of those 12 sons. I am of the tribe of Simeon. Well, that was one of the sons of Jacob. Well, I was of the tribe of Judah. Another, you follow, that it comes in that manner. Though I didn't mention it, after he wrestles with God and is blessed, what happens with his reunion with Esau? When Esau murders him for all the terrible things that Jacob did? No, he didn't do that. They reconcile. They reconcile, as probably only grown brothers can do. To set aside all of the anger and all the hatred and all the reasons to despise each other. To say at the end of the day, life is just too short. And you're my brother. And we will make peace. Well, this big family of Jacob's becomes quite noteworthy, especially in Jacob's favorite son. The son of his old age, coming from his favorite wife. This is the child of Rachel. And this is Joseph. And if you've seen Joseph in his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, it's actually a pretty dang good retelling of the story. That Joseph is a favored son, and he is favored by God with these prophetic dreams. And not knowing any better, not being the sort of kid who takes the obvious favor and tries to make everybody feel bad. I mean, he just seems to be a great guy, but he still rubs all the brothers the wrong way. And he shares these dreams about basically how all the other brothers are going to eventually have to come to him in worship and in adoration, how he's going to kind of stand strong and tall against everybody else. And eventually they just get enough of it, and I'm sick of this. And Dad's giving you this great coat, and he hadn't given me jack, and just, that's it. And they cook up this plan, and they're going to kill him. And then some of them have kind of a change of heart, and they decide, let's not kill him. We'll just sell him off into slavery. So they sell him off into slavery. They convince Jacob that he's dead. Joseph is sold off into slavery. He is taken eventually into Egypt. He does very well for himself. He's so talented, and he is so faithful, he is so hardworking, and he's such a great God that even within this bondage of slavery, he keeps showing himself in excellence, and he rises to the top of the rank within Potiphar's household. And it turns out to be Potiphar's conniving wife. Because Joseph is so handsome, she wants to sleep with him. And Joseph, the upstanding fear of God, says, ain't no way, that she cooks up a way to get him in trouble. Thrown back in jail. For a guy who's just, I mean, he's sort of all-American boy here, but he can't catch a break. But even in jail, God protects and preserves him. Even those kind of weird prophetic dreams. He's now given dreams of some of his fellow prisoners and is able to interpret their own dreams that have been troubling them. Those prisoners, in turn out to be servants of Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh, who, like everyone else in Egypt, has been troubled with the same crazy, reoccurring dream. Because he finds out through the servant who lives, actually, that there is an Israelite in jail who has the gift of interpreting dreams. He brings Joseph out. Joseph not only interprets the dream, but he sees it as a specific message from God to Pharaoh and all of Egypt. And that God has not only given Joseph the gift of interpretation, but the gift of application. This is what you do with it. It is actually a premonition and warning of a great famine that is going to strike Egypt. But I know how to help. And it is Joseph, through the guidance of God, that comes up with this plan to store a portion of the food. That when the lean years come, they'll be able to live off of what they have saved. Egypt is saved, and as everyone else in the world in that area suffers during a 7-year drought, Egypt is just fine. And Joseph rises to really the height of prominence within Egypt. He's like Vice Pharaoh. He's right up there at the top. Well, if everyone else is suffering, that means Jacob and his family back in Canaan, they're suffering too. And they know there's only one place to go for food. It's either stay in Canaan and die, or go to Egypt and beg. So the brothers go to Egypt and beg, and who would they wind up begging to? But just like his dream, they bow and grovel before Joseph without knowing who he is. They assume he's just some important figure within the Egyptian hierarchy. They have no idea this is the brother that they tried to kill and sold into slavery. Joseph sees, though, his brothers have changed. They have matured. And he sees a quality of mercy and of godliness within them. He actually is able to trick them into showing just how generous and merciful, how mature they have become. And it's only after that he reveals himself to them. And they are able to finally reconcile and even be reunited with Jacob himself as he is brought into Egypt. And they are there under the protection of Joseph. Joseph, the most important man in Egypt, providing for his family in a land now of plenty and of protection. Here's the problem. That's how Genesis concludes. How does Exodus begin? there came a Pharaoh who did not remember Joseph. You see the connection even there. How do we get the jam that we're in? Well, we've seen from the beginning of creation what we've done, and now we're brought into the time of Exodus, where Israel is again multiplied into a mighty nation, but they are a nation of slaves within Egypt. They had come initially with Joseph, under Joseph's great prominence and his protection. Well, as the years passed by and they got more numerous, the pharaohs who followed forgot what Joseph did for them. And they just decided, we've got all these foreigners in our land. I don't like that, and it makes me nervous. So what we need to do is we need to enslave them. A, cheap labor, and B, if we oppress them, they can never overthrow us. Because they're getting to be just too dang big. I don't want to have more Israelites than Egyptians in Egypt. So the way we do that is to crush them. This is where we find ourselves within the story of Exodus. Let my people go. Well, this is what they're being let go from. You probably remember the story of Exodus, of Moses, who was due to be killed as a baby so they could cull the herd. That's what Pharaoh wanted to do, get rid of a bunch of boys to just kind of reduce the population. God spares Moses, and in a miraculous manner, Moses is brought as a baby into the court of Pharaoh himself and raised as a young prince of Egypt. He didn't realize that he should be a slave out there. He sees only the power and the prominence of Pharaoh's court. And perhaps you remember the time where he begins to figure out who he is, and he sees the oppression of those who should be his people, and in trying to defend the Israelite, winds up accidentally killing an Egyptian who was about to kill a fellow Israelite. He runs off. Moses, great Moses, he's a murderer. He's wanted by the law. And instead of either fessing up for his crime or taking the punishment or the consequences, he skips town. And he spends the majority of his adult life living as a nomadic stranger. And it's from that point that God calls him. The burning bush happens, after an adult life of living on the lam, of trying to forget everyone and everything. God calls to Moses from the burning bush, and he sends him to go back to where he's come from and to tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. Now, if you remember the story, and Moses says, they're not going to listen to me. Who am I supposed to say has sent me? And we get, I am who I am, and God is revealing his very nature. But that's kind of tricky to comprehend. So he makes it a little more clear for them. You say to them, the God of your fathers has come for you. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of the Genesis story. Your God who has chosen you as a people. He has heard the cries, he will answer his promise, and he will deliver you from bondage. And Moses goes, he tells Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh says no. There's this back and forth. Oh yeah? Yeah. The plagues come. These 10 plagues, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and still Pharaoh steadfastly refuses. Pharaoh will begin to suffer just enough to say, well, you know what, I should probably just end this now and let him go. But something happens and he hardens his heart yet again. And the ante continually gets upped until the final plague, and that is the plague of death. The firstborn sons all across Egypt are struck down. All but those who, as God instructs Moses, take the blood of a lamb and put it over your doorposts, and death will pass over you. This is the Lord's Passover, and now I will free you from Egypt. They run for it. They get to the Red Sea, and they're boxed in, and the army is chasing them. And it is God himself who opens up a path. Stretch out your hand, Moses, and behold the power of God. And Israel is able to file through and walk on dry land in what should be the depths of the sea. The water will close in over the pursuing Egyptians, and they are now on the other side. The army that followed them themselves have been destroyed. They are free. and they are safe. They're not back home. Frankly, they don't know home. They haven't been to this promised land, this land of Canaan, in generations upon generations. They know nothing about it. But after all of the excitement has worn down about now we're free from slavery, we've seen this miraculous, ocean be opened up and everything like that. Now they're on the other side and they're in the desert, and they start thinking, now what? Now what are we supposed to do? We're in the desert. What have you done? And we will see this repeated time and time and time again. God does something amazing, miraculous, supernatural, and everyone's like, wow, we're free from slavery, or wow, we just walked through the sea. What? And then the next day, it's so miserable out here. I wish I were dead. I wish I were back in Egypt. Oh, Egypt. Yeah, we were slaves and all, but there were leeks and onions. We'll see that again and again and again. And isn't it just like we were intimate with God, and us dumb, rebellious, stupid teenagers, we rebel, we're stupid, we're dumb, and we wander off. Israel will do this time and time and time again. They complain that they're dying of thirst. God commands Moses to strike a rock. In the midst of the wilderness, there is enough water to quench them. Oh, we're hungry. God rains down manna every morning, just enough of this stuff. Manna just means, but this stuff, this heavenly bread, just enough for them. Every morning, they are supernaturally provided for, just enough for that day. And they complain it's boring to be supernaturally provided for food every morning. And so quail start appearing on the ground every morning. Flightless birds just sit there saying, eat me. And they complain, they get tired of that too. They don't know where they're going, so a pillar of cloud appears during the day. And at night, when it wouldn't be visible, it transforms to a pillar of fire. Every single day, there is this spectacular and visual reminder that God is there with them, and they still moan and complain. They will come from times of wow, look what has got it, and the next day is, they're teenagers. Teenagers, just like us. So, we are moving now in through the wilderness, following that pillar of cloud, following that pillar of fire, and eventually God will lead Moses up onto the mountaintop, up on Mount Sinai, and they will commune together. Moses actually gets to be in the very presence of God. He gets to see some aspect of God. No one else has done. No one else could possibly do. It's so transformative, as a matter of fact, that when he goes and he spends time with God, he comes back down from the mountain and he's glowing or something because he freaks everybody else out. He is so scary to look at because just being in God's presence has changed him. He starts having to kind of cover his face. This is where God offers Torah, the law. 10 commandments that will forever signify my relationship with you. It will set the boundaries, you teenagers, so that you will know that I love you. It will set the boundary, you teenagers, so you don't do something stupid. It will set the boundaries to distinguish you from everyone else out there that you belong to me. Brings down these 10 commandments. After everything that's happened, and what does he find? There is a golden calf they have manufactured, and they are worshiping. Oh, golden calf who saved us from the Egyptians. Oh, golden calf who gives us water from rocks and quail on the ground. And when Moses calls them on it, you know what they said? It's his own dang brother. I threw some gold in the fire, and the calf just came out. It's sort of, Adam, where did you get that out? It was Eve. Eve, where did I threw it in the fire and it came out. Are you serious? I mean, that's a teenager's excuse if I ever heard one. First set of 10 commandments. Kapow! They're destroyed. Even the law itself is taken away from them. The 10 Commandments that they're given, that's the second set. Only eventually does God allow Moses to rewrite them. But they are punished for their transgressions, for this rank idolatry, this stupid idolatry. And then Exodus will be concluded in explaining and extrapolating the law, those 10 Commandments, into the principles that will govern Israel on a day-to-day basis. Our own legal system, founded on the Constitution, but not found solely within it. All the legal precedent, all of the findings, all of the laws underneath that may govern our daily lives, but stemming, ostensibly at least, from that original document. Well, the same thing, the 10 Commandments set these 10 overarching principles, but how they're actually applied in specific circumstances, in daily life, and what have you, that is what is fed through the rest of Exodus and on into the third book, Leviticus. Leviticus gets a bum rap. Leviticus sounds very dull and very boring, and again, it's law. Leviticus is tons of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. It's also tons of very specific instructions for the Levites and the priests, those who were in charge of the religious and the ceremonial life of Israel, and it can seem very dry and it can seem very dull. Let me say it's not a great place to get started. If you're just starting to read the Bible, don't start leafing through Leviticus. But Leviticus is quite important. Let me give you just a few quick things to think about. In Leviticus, we see the law, how we have our regular laws underneath the Constitution. This is everything else flowing from and through the 10 Commandments. Well, even that is then sort of broken into what we've generally understood within the church into kind of three subsets. We have a moral law, a ceremonial law, and a civil law. And those are obviously related, but they sort of speak about slightly different things. When we have for example, don't eat shrimp, shellfish, and crustaceans because they're not kosher. Is that a civil law? Is that like property rights, or if you injure or murder someone? No. That is referred to as a ceremonial law. It has to do with your standing before God and within the community. Are you ritually pure or not? A moral law would again be treating your neighbor as yourself. It would be how we are settling disputes. It is how our behavior should be within the community to one another and in relation to God. Civil law is a recognition that Israel is both a people and it is a nation. That there are some parts of the law that are ordering of a civil society that have to do very specifically with Israel as a theocracy. These laws, again, like I said, are interrelated, but you need to be able to measure them out within the flowing of Leviticus. There are certain things, for example, where Jesus declares that it is not what goes into a man's stomach that makes him unclean, it is what comes out, and he declares food to be clean. The moral law, ceremonial law, or civil law has been changed. Is this a civil law about what we're reading? Is it a moral law? What is it? It is a ceremonial law. It's about uncleanness. What Leviticus is intended to do on these laws is to basically establish two things. How to get right with God and how to stay right with God. There are certain sacrifices and offerings and atonements and all that kind of stuff that is intended to restore your relationship with God, to get right. And there are ways of practice and behavior. These are the moral codes. These are the specific religious celebrations that Leviticus talks about. And that's the instruction how to stay right. Now that your relationship with God has been fixed, how do you keep it that way? And then understanding you're not going to keep it that way, you're going to screw up. How do we fix it again? And now that it's fixed, how do you keep it that way? You see, all these laws can really be broken down into those two simple precepts. Is this to get you right with God, or is this to keep you right with God? the moral, the civil, the ceremonial, they all fit within those two broad understandings. But the overarching principle here, again, is holiness is serious business. God himself is holy, and he desires his family to reflect that quality of his own nature. Holiness is a serious business. Whether we are talking about how you are to compensate someone when you injure them, or you're talking about the tassels that you are supposed to have on your clothing, that every time you brush by them, it will remind you that you belong to God and this is his world and you are his man. This is all about how serious it is to God that we see all of our lives reflecting him. Big things, little things, holiness is serious, and that is what the book of Leviticus is trying to get across. It's a big deal to be part of the family. It is a big deal to be part of God's chosen people. We're separated out from everyone else, Leviticus is saying. Do it right. It's worth doing right. God himself is holy. We ought to be holy as well. Numbers is what happens about a year or so after the giving of the law. Numbers begins on the threshold of the promised land. They've made it. Hooray! But there are people there. Oops. We can't just go into the promised land. We're going to have to do something about it. Some spies are sent in to kind of scope out the land. And they come back with some relatively frightening reports of how big, strong, and scary all of those people are and what happens. All the people of Israel who have had miracle after miracle after miracle given to them, they hear a report that the people who are already in the promised land are kind of big and scary, and they freak out. You have brought us here for nothing. You have brought us here to kill us. We might as well be dead. We might as well be back in Egypt. Only two guys, two of the spies say, oh, we'll take them. Hey man, God's on our side. We will take them. Joshua and Caleb are not afraid of what they find in the promised land because they have seen God's faithfulness with their own two eyes and they know he'll be faithful still. That entire generation now must pass away. All of those people who looked in the promised land and said, oh, we can't do it. Well, forget it. I am not going to build a mighty nation out of you. You had your chance and you blew it. Back to the desert you go. When we talk about the wandering, the 40 years in the desert, 39 of those years are the consequence of them saying, we can't do it. They were right there. They were right there. And they balked, and God sent them back to wander. He sent them to wander until all of that generation was dead. The original adults, the ones who were responsible for boo-hoo-hoo, we can never make it, will all grow old in the wilderness and pass away, and it will be their children and their children's children who will finally cross into the land of promise. Only Joshua and Caleb, the two faithful men, will have the opportunity to go in themselves. Numbers is interesting. It's about numbers. It starts off with basically genealogies and it ends with genealogies. It takes a numbering of the people who were there, and you get this rough idea. This is a ton of people, man. It goes from tribe to tribe to tribe to tribe, and it starts counting out how many people are there. And it turns out to be a ton of people. And then at the end of Numbers, now that they have gone full circle for the 39 years, and after the 40 years of wandering, that generation has died away, it counts again. Guess what? Remade. That's the Numbers. It starts off with Numbers. It ends with Numbers, and in between we have this story of their flight, the faithfulness of Caleb and Joshua, and then the Lord sending them back on this wandering. The wandering of the rest of the 40 years of the desert happens within the book of Numbers. This is where Moses himself takes the consequence of impatience and disobedience. For the umpteenth millionth time, the people start whining about water. And for what must have been apparently the first time, Moses doesn't ask God to provide. Moses is so irritated, he just takes his staff. Fine, take it. Kapow! Here's your water. I did it. Are you happy? Whiner babies. And God says, well, For your impatience, Moses, does not come through you. You are not the giver of water. I, the Lord, am. Because of your impatience, even though it's understandable, there will be a consequence. And you, Moses, the hero, Moses, my man, Moses, who has seen me and been in my presence until you glow, you yourself will not step foot into the promised land. And he doesn't. The life of Moses ends at the end of the fifth and final book, Deuteronomy. Within sight of the promised land. He's given the grace of climbing to the top of the mountain one last time, looking over and seeing the promised land before him. It is not for him, but he is given the gift to see it at last. Deuteronomy is the final sermon of Moses. Deuteronomy will feel very repetitive when you read it. Didn't you already hear this already? I mean, he's talking about the Passover, he's talking about the Exodus, and blah, 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 and on and on and on. And then he starts talking about the law again. Like, didn't we already do that back in Exodus? That's what Deuteronomy means. Deuteronomy, second law. It is a retelling of stuff, and if it sounds repetitive, I want you to put it in a slightly different context. I want you to put it in the context of an old man who lies in his deathbed, who knows his time has come. And as his family has gathered around, calls them in close. He has one last thing to say to them. In that place, it's maybe your father or your grandfather. What do you want to hear? What does he want to share? And Moses wants the people to know one more time everything they've been through. You remember when God led us out of Egypt? Remember how the waters parted. Remember the law. Remember that. And he preaches this sermon about keeping the law, the fortitude, and he keeps reminding them of their own disobedience, and he keeps reminding them of God's own faithfulness. Deuteronomy is a final sermon, and think about Moses in his place. If it seems repetitive, imagine what he's trying to do is remind the people, I'm not going to be around anymore. This is it for me, but this is what you've got to know. I'm not going to be there to smack sense in you anymore. I'm not going to be there to be the one who strikes the rock or to lead or to listen to your whining or whatever. Please, one last chance, you got to listen to me. Hear what I'm telling you. Let me tell you one more time. And that is the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, if written by Moses, is concluded by someone else. Perhaps Joshua, who becomes the next in line. For Deuteronomy ends with Moses' death. As he is there on the mountaintop, he is given the grace of seeing the promised land. And then he dies. And it is God himself who lays him to rest. It's the only time we see this in the Bible. It says God digs a grave and lays Moses to rest. Moses, his friend. The friend of God. It will be God's own hand who returns Moses to the dust of the earth, like Adam, where it began. This is the foundation of everything that happens next. The first 5 books of the Pentateuch, the book of Moses, Torah, God's law, everything else will be built on this. That's it.